Hello there, my name's Ken Cook, and this video I'm presenting to you is designed to show the British public how the British state can and does, with monotonous regularity, ruin people's lives. It does this in many different ways and in many different areas of our lives, ranging from how not fit for purpose government departments mess up people in numerous ways when they are forced to have to use these departments and then get stuffed around with a fourth-rate service or no service at all, and to even losing their or close relatives' lives. Everything they do takes forever when one may need to get a fast service, and this can then ruin whatever the person is trying to achieve. It can be safely said that absolutely every government department is not fit for purpose, and that is said over and over by others. Even politicians, who, it must be said, should be making sure they do work. Trying to get justice against these oafs is only a recipe for stonewalling, lying, and every dirty trick in the book being used against you to stop you from getting justice and making you lose the will to go on living. I could go on and list all the departments that are not working, but that would take some time, so I'm now going to stick with just the three that stuffed up my life and my business, namely the Intellectual Property Office, the Met and Dorset Police Forces, and the Justice Ministry and all its myriad of sub-departments. Anyone who sees this video and who works in or has experience in our justice system, who may feel that what is exposed is a blot on that system, so much so that they would like to help in some way to rectify it, can get in touch with me. That can be done on my blog. Meanwhile, in this video I will have to explain some facts that happened in the lead-up to the worst event which happened in 2005, so that you can understand why that meeting took place. And then I will briefly explain what happened after that 2005 event in conclusion. I hope you will stick with it through to the end, for what I will explain to you has much significance for our so-called justice system, which is truly broken. Before that, let me introduce on my left Mr. Paul Reeder.
Morning.
Who purchased one of my creations some years back, a Lamborghini replica car. He recently came across my blog, the address of which is shown on this video, and he was able to see that what happened to the company that had built that car. He then got in touch with me because he agreed with what I was saying in the blog, and he wanted to act as an interviewer for this video. So, if you can say to the viewers what you would like to say before we kick off.
Yeah, indeed. It was a great car, phenomenal car, Ken.
Yeah.
Really enjoyed it. It was 24 years ago now, but like all these sort of big things, it just seems like yesterday that I was driving that car backwards and forwards to Scotland, and the car itself, it was a loud car. It was very low, it was very wide, it was a big car. It worked. I used to drive the thing, you know, just between me and the gatepost, probably about 130 quite comfortably on an empty motorway. Bit naughty, but I loved it. I couldn't park it, but I could go quite fast forwards. And on the motorway into Scotland, banking around the curves, looking down at the countryside, it just felt a little bit like being in a jet fighter. That's the way I like to put it, but it was a beautiful car, it worked. I wish I still had it now, to tell the truth.
Well, we all would like that, but they're not a very, they're not a car that you can use every day.
Not really.
Well anyway, as Paul has said, he bought the Lamborghini second-hand from a Hampshire dealer after the original owner, Mr. Pond, who I built it for, had part exchanged it after some 4 years of owning it. Paul was then working for the MOD at the nuclear submarine base in Scotland that they called Faslane.
Yeah.
As he lives in Croydon, he made that long trip many times in the dead of night and in that car. So I'm glad that he thought it was a nice car, and that he enjoyed the ownership of it and driving it. And I think it shows you, which I hope comes across, that the car was made by my company, and it will show the viewers of this video what kind of company I had at that time when that car was built.
Yeah, I would add there, Ken, that it was a proper car company, and it had a big reputation at the time. I didn't buy a kit car on the spur of the moment. I'd been looking at which kit for a few years and all the different publications. I knew very well about the company. It was one of the big players in the market.
Right, well that was a nice insight into the company and the cars that it built, because we also built Cobra replicas. That then existed in the 80s. I started it in 85, and it was renowned for building great replica sports cars that sold in quite big numbers, mostly for export, I may add. But we sold them in kit form, and many factory built cars such as Paul's car was. And as I say, all this was started by me in 1985 when I returned from a long spell in Australia, where I had a fiberglass powerboat building business. And I came back to Bournemouth specifically to start a kit car business specialising in Cobra replicas. But later on we did also add to our repertoire, as it were, the Lamborghini. Everything was going fine, and the company turnover shot off to an electric start, with us gaining an export order worth over £1 million a year for a Japanese company. They wanted 100 cars a year, mostly Cobras, a few Lamborghinis. Kit car sales shot off in the UK, and things were looking very rosy until a recession hit us in 1990. Sales slowed down and the company was forced to downgrade in order to survive. But survive it did until early 1992, when it was hit firstly by the actions of my then London agent, who decided my design of the Cobra was so good that he just had to copy it. And not only that, but also to steal the trademark that applied to it, namely Viper. And it was here that I was forced to have to come into contact with a government department, which went on to ruining my life and business. I talk here of the Patent Office, later known as the Intellectual Property Office. This detestable government department truly is one of those that is always described as not fit for purpose. And I found that not only was that true, but it also turned out to be absolutely corrupt. So from 1992 right up to 2010, some 18 years later, this wretched lot was responsible for ruining my life and business. Now, this business of mine proved very quickly that it could have been the vehicle that would enable me to realise exactly what I'd hoped it would do. That would be to enable me to build up savings and a saleable business to all fund a comfortable retirement that was looming. Not only that, but to be able to leave my kids and grandkids a reasonable inheritance. Not an unreasonable aspiration, I think, for anyone. So from 1992 onwards, so many things happened that if I related all of them to you in detail, we would be here for a week. So what I'm going to do is to relate in brief what happened up to 2005, then in detail the one event that sealed my company's demise, and at which there occurred a number of criminal acts. After that 2005 event and to 2010, I will again be brief, then I will relate what happened before that period. The events after 2010 to now, I will describe as briefly as I can. It is the event of 2005 that I'm trying to get dealt with through legal channels right now, and which is the whole purpose of this video. I hope it will be successful in getting that event exposed to the wider public with a view to getting justice, which you will see has completely eluded me, as it does for so many others, being stuffed by the state. So here goes, pin your ears back. In 1992, I heard through the kit car grapevine that Chrysler had applied to register my trademark Viper.
How exactly did you hear about that, Ken?
Well, the kit car industry, you may or may not know, is quite a small industry in Britain in real terms. And so everybody knows everybody. We do all these kit car shows and people meet each other and talk to each other. And if somebody gets up to no good, the gossip will go round, and you'll find out about it fairly quickly, which is what I did. I think somebody phoned me up and said, "Hey, do you know Chrysler have applied for your trademark?"
Right.
And that's how I found out. So after finding out that, I also heard that not only were Chrysler trying to apply to register what was my trademark, which I hadn't registered, by the way, at that time. I'd been too busy building up the company. But I also heard that this nice chap by the name of Robert Busbridge had kindly offered to sell them that trademark, posing as the rightful owner.
And he was your agent in London?
That's right.
Operating on your behalf?
Yes, we took him on in January 1988 as our London agent, and he lived in Sutton. Now, why did we do this? Well, we found that even though Bournemouth is not that far from London, from the southeast corner of England, which, let's face it, is the richest part of Britain, and a lot of our sales for kits, it was mainly kits that we sold in the UK, came from that area, and it seemed to me to make sense to take on somebody in London, because we found that even though Bournemouth is only 100 miles from London, a lot of people seem to be too lazy to drive down here to our factory and see our cars. So we took him on in 1988 to look after all the sales of kits in the southeast, and for 4 years he was quite a good agent, sold quite a few kits. But he had, on hearing, he also heard that Chrysler were applying to register this trademark. When he heard that, the criminal side of his nature obviously took over, and he quickly thought of a ruse of going to Chrysler, posing as the genuine owner of the trademark. And he kindly offered to sell them that trademark, posing, as I say, as the rightful owner. Now get this, not only that, but he was asking a cool £500,000
Not bad.
For it. Yeah, not bad if you can do it. Quite nice, Cyril, as they say, if you can do it. In police terms, that fact gives us all very good reason why somebody would be willing to go as far as committing criminal acts that Busbridge went on to commit from then on, in order to earn £500,000. Utter greed for a nice payday that he hoped to get. But as I said, a nice one if you can get it, but I thought over my dead body. So I started legal actions to stop this, and one of these was to put into the IPO an opposition to Chrysler's application.
And that was in 1992?
Yes, that is, you can say, when all my problems kicked off. Had I known, I don't know what I would have done, but certainly at the time, it was imperative for me, I thought, to secure my trademark. You see, trademark law, common law, if you apply common law to trademarks, the law says that the first one to use any trademark is the one that has the rightful ownership to it. So you don't actually have to register a trademark to have lawful rights to it. But obviously if it is registered, it makes it easier to take action against other people that might want to pinch it. But you can still take action, as I did against Chrysler, and I put in an application to oppose their application in 1992, and I took on a patent agent to do that for me. Patent agent being cheaper than an IP lawyer, but they still know what to do. Now, due to the usual civil service non-service, this took only a staggering 6 years to reach a tribunal hearing in 1998. However, Chrysler tried at that hearing to blacken my name by saying that the agency agreement I had with Busbridge and his brother Martin, which I put in as evidence that Busbridge was my agent and therefore had no rights to it, was a forgery. He and Chrysler were saying that as it was a forgery, therefore my testimony could not be relied on. In other words, I was a lying crook. Busbridge was their star and only witness at that hearing. But you've got to ask yourself, why would I have to forge any agreement when it was well known and backed by documentary evidence that he was indeed my agent? But despite that, I won easily, as it was a nonsense, and I could prove usage right back to 1986 using common law, and Chrysler could not do the same because they only brought their Viper sports cars into the UK market in 1990, which is when they applied.
But during that interim, so from the early 90s up until 98, when this first hearing was heard, they're selling the Dodge Viper all in that interim.
Yes, they were. I couldn't stop them, you see. You can only take legal action against somebody using your trademark if your trademark is registered. So what you have to do, what I had to do in my case, was get it registered. Oppose them first by using common law rights, by saying, well, I started using this long before you did. And then win, hopefully, that opposition. And then I would then get registration on it, and I would then be able to stop them from selling their Dodge Viper in the UK under the name Viper, which I eventually did. But like I say, it took until 1998 before I could even get into court. And in that period, they were selling their Dodge as a Viper, and I couldn't do anything about it. However, their car didn't actually impinge on my sales because it was a totally different kind of car. And they, in actual fact, if you check the sales records of that car, they only ever sold over a 10-year period about 16 cars in the UK. But the other side effect of that was, which I hope I can prove and you can see with this video, is that not only was I not able to stop Chrysler from using the trademark, I was also not able to stop my ex-agent from using it. And that meant that I was faced with somebody making a copy of my car. And selling it on the same market that I was trying to sell my car and kit, using exactly the same trademark name.
So this was Busbridge.
Busbridge, Robert Busbridge.
Selling your Cobra.
Yeah. He copied my Cobra at the same time in 1992. Well, as soon as I found out that he was doing what he did with Chrysler, you know, he became my ex-agent.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, he started taking steps to copy my Cobra. He copied the chassis, copied the body, and he put it on the market. So I was faced, as I say, with this exact copy of my Cobra and using the same trademark name. So up till 1998, I wouldn't do anything about it.
Yeah.
I lost a lot of profits and sales due to that, because he was in a good part of the UK, as I say, for making sales. In this hearing in 1998, I easily won, because my patent agent was easily able, through documentation of my usage of the name, to prove to the tribunal hearing that I had the first rights to it. And I won. However, as is always the case with these damn legal things, you always have a right to appeal. And straight away, Chrysler immediately put in an appeal to the High Court. And I'm sure they were thinking that I would drop away due to the high cost of me defending that. Because once you get into the High Court, I mean, you're in for telephone numbers. So what happened there after that is, as I said, didn't have a registered trademark still, even though I'd won, the IPO couldn't give me the registration of it, because this Chrysler appeal to the High Court was there. So I was still stuck in the same legal situation. I couldn't stop Chrysler using it, which didn't really matter, but the real thing that did matter was I couldn't stop my agent using it either.
No.
And the thing is that I don't know why Chrysler did this. Well, I think I do know why, but they sat on that application to the High Court and didn't do anything about it. And so from 1998 to 2001, I was stuck in limbo, continually losing out to Busbridge, because I still didn't have registration, and I couldn't afford to take on a lawyer. But eventually in 2001 I decided I've got to take on a lawyer, and I went to one in Guildford who specialised in intellectual property, and asked him to ask Chrysler, in other words, to either put up or shut up, and which he did, and it cost me money. But I knew that all things being equal, I could win, and if I won, I'd get my costs back anyway. And that is what happened. Eventually, in 2002, they gave in. And in 2002, I got registration.
So that's an actual paper?
Yes, an
certificated.
actual certificate of registration.
Yeah.
From 1992, when I put my application in to oppose Chrysler, Busbridge went to the Metropolitan Police and said that the trademark agreement, the agency agreement that I had with him, which was a document that he and his brother signed, was a forgery.
Yeah.
I had given a copy of that agreement to Chrysler, because once I started dealing with Chrysler, they quickly said, well, you're not the only user of this trademark, because this fella Busbridge is using it. And he's come to us, as I said before. They didn't actually mention that he'd asked £500,000, but they made it plain to me that they thought I was lying. So I said, well, I'm not lying, he was my agent, it's easily provable, and here is a copy of this agreement we have making him the agent.
Yeah.
And they said, oh well, he says it's a forgery. that the signatures of him and his brother on it are a forgery. Now, as I said to you before, I mean, why would I want to forge it? Because everybody knew he was my agent. But what he did is he went to the police and said that this is a forgery. He went to the Met Police because the tribunal hearing was held in London. So he went to the Met Police in the early 90s and asked them to arrest me for forgery and perjury, and they declined. They said, well, it's a civil matter, which in actual fact it isn't, but the police do this all the time when they don't want to investigate something. So he didn't get anywhere with that. Now, after the 1998 hearing, which I won against Chrysler, he went to the Met Police again. Now, in that period of 92 to 98, he was employing an ex-Met police officer in his business. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, you can see where it was going. I mean, eventually, this guy obviously went and used his influence when he went to the Met the second time. And what happened was this. In early November 1999, early in the morning, the Dorset police came knocking on my door to arrest me for forgery, perverting the course of justice with this forged document, and perjury, because in the Chrysler hearing I perjured myself by saying it wasn't a forgery. Mm-hmm. You can imagine what I felt at that stage. And we all know who had their finger in all that. Definitely Busbridge. And a big possibility is that Chrysler also pushed things along and helped by the IPO. For both the Met and maybe Dorset had to interview people in the IPO to gather information on the case, because the forgery, or rather the forged document, was presented in the 1998 case in London. Mm-hmm. And so the police would obviously go to the IPO for their slant on things, you know, was it produced in this hearing, so on and so forth. So I believe there's a big possibility that Chrysler pushed things along, helped by the IPO. Now, had they been successful, I would have been put away. Mm. I think a maximum 4 years for perjury. I don't know what the total would have been if they'd have been able to manage the perverting the course of justice and the forgery. It could have been more than 4 years. And had they been successful in doing that, they could have then gone merrily along their illegal ways.
Indeed.
They would have got me out of the way. Both Chrysler would have got me out of the way, leaving the field open for Busbridge, my ex-agent, to carry on his trying to get money out of them for selling them the trademark. Now, I had to endure a 2-week trial in Dorchester. But I easily won, as my barrister flayed Busbridge, and he came across as the shifty lying bastard that he is. Mm. And the jury, it should be noted, only took 20 minutes to decide my innocence, and that I was not guilty.
And so what date was this 2-week hearing, Ken?
Actually, they arrested me in November 1999, but of course you don't get into court straight away. After the police had done all their work and etc., it was another year. And it was in 2000 sometime, I can't remember the exact date.
Right.
So, 2-week trial, which I easily won. But it takes a toll on you, I can tell you. And it is worth noting that at that trial, Chrysler had a representative there. And so that they obviously, I could see, were still interested in, you know, who was going to win or whatever over this trademark. and they actually approached me and asked me did I want to sell it to them
Right.
if I won.
During this hearing, the
Yeah,
two-week
during
hearing.
the trial at the county court. So I knew they were they were well into it, and this is why I say, well, maybe they had a hand in seeing me getting charged for all that I did get charged for. So you have to ask why were they what was going on behind the scenes. I was very wary of it all. Chrysler, as I've said, after I had won registration of that mark, appealed, and I didn't drop away as they'd hoped, and in 2001 they gave up and I got registration.
Well, you retained your registration, you already had the registration from 1998.
No, as I've said, in 1998 I'd only won.
Yeah.
But I hadn't got registration because they appealed.
Right.
It was on hold, as it were.
Yeah.
And they didn't bother going to the ends of that appeal in the High Court. They dropped it, and then that's when I got registration in 2002.
Right.
They had to actually give me registration, the IPO, because there was no other way they could do it. I mean, I'd won against Chrysler, and therefore they had to give it me, going by the rules. And I stress on that because you'll see later on why I'm stressing on it. The IPO just had to give me the registration, going by the rules. However, that was only the beginning of yet another nightmare. I thought, well, it's all over, but it wasn't. The nightmare started, or further went on, when I went for a rest from all the strain of this. You know, I'd gone through a year waiting for the trial. I'd gone through 8 years of messing about with Chrysler. So I went to Spain for a week or so, and arriving at the nice seaside town of Nerja, I suffered a massive heart attack. Obviously the stress of the past 10 years had taken its toll on me, but because I was super fit, I survived, and I'm putting it down to that fact. But it took me 6 months of exercise to get back anywhere near fit again. I decided at that stage that carrying on the depleted business that I was now left with just wasn't worth it. And I packed up at only 61 years old and sold the business for a pittance, which was all I could get for it. For my business was at such a low ebb and making me barely a weekly wage due to the acts of Busbridge and the IPO. In the late 80s, my business was turning over, going on £1 million. My turnover in 1989, the whole year of 1989 to the end of it, was heading for £1 million. And in the late 80s, that was not an insignificant turnover.
No.
And it goes without saying that had things on without all this going on with Busbridge and Chrysler, I could have continued to build that business up even further.
Yeah.
However, we all know that in 1991, I think it was, certainly 1992, we had the last recession. Not as bad as this one, I must say, but it still was a recession which hit the kit car industry, because the kit car industry is, the products it makes is not a product that everybody has to have.
Yeah.
It's a hobby.
In fact, the 25-year anniversary of Black Wednesday was this week.
Oh, was it?
It's nice.
Well, it certainly hit my business. You know, one minute you're doing nearly $1 million, and then the next minute you've got this recession come in. Things didn't just overnight, they started to wind down from 1990 on. And at this stage, you must remember that Busbridge was still my agent. Immediately after I got out of Malaga Hospital, they said that Busbridge was going to oppose my registration. And I couldn't believe that. I mean, The IPO knew full well of my history.
Mhm.
I mean, we'd just gone through this business with Chrysler, and a lot of evidence went into the IPO to prove that I was the owner of, the rightful owner of that trademark. And they knew what Busbridge was. They knew, for instance, that he tried to sell it to Chrysler. And here they were, 5 minutes after they'd just given me the registration, saying, oh, by the way, we're going to let this crook, I mean, they didn't say that, but that's what he was, we're going to allow this bloke, Busbridge, to oppose the registration that we've just given you. I just couldn't believe it. It was
that an individual at the IPO that allowed that then to happen?
well, you never know. I mean, they will never admit to giving you names. Any of these civil servant departments, when you try to get justice against something they've done, very difficult to pin down who was responsible, because they obviously don't want you taking an individual to court, and I don't think you could take an individual to court anyway. So I've no idea who was responsible for deciding that, despite the evidence they had, that Busbridge was nothing more than a little crook. He actually was my ex-agent, and why did he have the right to oppose my registration? But that's what happened. And I obviously kicked up about it, but it's like talking to a brick wall when you're talking to civil servants. They decide they want to do something, and that's it. So I had a never-ending fight on my hands. Just when I thought after 10 years it was all over and dusted. But I decided on principle to fight on, even though I'd closed my business. As after all, in every which way it was my trademark, and by law. So don't forget, we are dealing here with a government department, and so I was beginning to think there were things going on here that were looking decidedly questionable. Was Chrysler putting the IPO up for all this? For I knew they still wanted that trademark, as they spent much money on trying to sell their Viper sports cars in the UK. Not to mention their Viper was undergoing one-make races in Europe. They'd set up a whole series of races in Europe where the only cars in that race were Vipers.
Yeah.
There must have been about at least half a dozen countries in Europe where they set up, including England. Now think about that, because when they were advertising these races, they were obviously using the name Viper.
Indeed.
And they had registered the name Viper in every European country, but not in the UK, because I'd stopped them. And you can imagine how much money it must have cost them to try and market a sports car throughout the whole of Europe and putting up all these races. So you can't help but think, I think, well, if they've spent all that money, how far would they be prepared to go, illegally maybe, in order to get rid of me? And so I was having all these thoughts about what's going on behind all this. And I was stopping them from doing what they wanted to do, now that I had the trademark registered to me. So that mark was worth money to me, even though I'd stopped my business, because I thought, well, will Chrysler, because they've said several times to me that they would be willing to buy the mark off me if I could get rid of Busbridge. They didn't want to pay both of us. And so I thought, well, I've got to fight. I've got to get rid of this Busbridge, because I've got nothing out of my business. My business had petered out, and I'd not made the kind of money to secure my future in retirement as I'd hoped for. And if I could get anything out of Chrysler in the end, it was worth carrying on and fighting. So that's why I decided, after I'd sold the business, to carry on fighting against Chrysler. For, in principle, why should this little bastard of a crook get anything that he didn't deserve?
And at this point, is he still making and selling
Exactly.
Vipers.
Yeah, yeah. It was a continual thorn in my mind when I saw him continuing to advertise what basically was my car that I'd created. And the lies that he was telling his potential customers were just unbelievable. So I fought on, as I said, and had to defend his opposition. So in 2004, I was now into yet another hearing. This time, I had to oppose Busbridge's application to register my legally registered mark. Briefly, it was officiated by an obviously corrupt hearing officer by the name of Reynolds. And as I, by now, had run out of a lot of my money that I had saved, I had to be a self-litigant in that. And this hearing officer was just ignoring all my evidence, both verbal and documentary. He even intimated I was a criminal forger who had been through a court case on criminal grounds. And although I'd won that case, if it had been a court case on civil grounds, I would have lost, in his opinion.
You'd have been found guilty of forgery in his
Yes,
opinion.
he thought, he made it quite plain. He thought, and immediately I thought, if this hearing officer thinks I'm a forger, I'm not going to win this case. And everything he was doing in that hearing was telling me he didn't believe this, he didn't believe that, and I was a criminal forger. And why was he even mentioning that case?
So this question of the forgery, it's already been tested by the law.
Yes.
Once when the police took you to court for the two-week hearing back then, and then also when you were up against Chrysler in the IPO, and now
he's saying
for the third time you're back in a room having it questioned whether or not your agency agreement was a forged document.
Yes, yes. I couldn't believe my ears. As I say, it had nothing to do with the case. I mean, this hearing in 2004 was supposed to be Busbridge opposing my registration.
Yeah.
And saying, for whatever reason, he thought it was incorrect. It should never have been brought up. I actually said to I said to this hearing officer, Reynolds, well, why are you bringing this up when I've been found not guilty in a court of law?
Yeah.
And that was when he said, oh yes, but if that court of law had been a civil case, in my opinion, you would have lost. And I knew then, well, I'm fighting a losing battle here.
So he had an agenda.
Yes.
And he'd got that agenda from somewhere.
Yes.
So it'd be reasonable to assume that it came from the IPO somewhere.
Well, I thought it's either the IPO, for some reason, not wanting me to ever have this trademark, or it's Chrysler behind them. I don't know if you're aware of it, but there have been many cases throughout history where big American multinational companies have done all sorts of illegal acts around the world. I mean, they're renowned for it. So I was thinking, well, why wouldn't Chrysler do some criminal acts? Have they got somebody in the IPO on their payroll? You know, because why is this all happening? I couldn't make it out. I could never understand what was going on, because being in the civil service department, government department, you can never get any answers. They're very good at hiding everything. So he made sure that I lost that hearing, and Busbridge could now apply to register the same trademark. The only way I could appeal that was through the High Court, as my original case to oppose Chrysler was held under the 1938 Trademarks Act, which was changed in 1974, I think. So anything that was applied to the IPO before 1974 was under the 38 Trademarks Act, and that made any appeals had to go through the High Court. And so we're here again the cost of going to the High Court to appeal this 2004 hearing were astronomical. I couldn't do it. However, during that 2004 hearing, the evidence that Busbridge put in was absolute rubbish. Most of it was irrelevant. Most of it was which way he could. And some of it was downright unlawful. In that regard, he had tried to tell the IPO that he owned the trademark by various means that he put forward, which were all illegal. And the worst illegal things that he did was he had gone bankrupt in 1992, and what he'd done, the crafty little bastard, when he knew he was going bankrupt, he knew that the trademark was an asset. And if the insolvency service going through his company saw that he owned in some way, or alleged that he owned this trademark, which was an asset, they might take it off him. So what he did is he assigned it. He said to the IPO in his evidence in this 2004 hearing that the trademark had been assigned away from him and to a limited company. And then later on, about 10 years later, when the bankruptcy was long gone, he had assigned it back from that company back to him.
Yeah.
And this was all illegal, because I won't go into it now because it'd take too long. But if you look at the intellectual property laws regarding assignments of trademarks, they have to be done within 6 months. The IPO has to be notified within 6 months of the assignment, and the assignment must have been done legally with documents, in other words, in writing, and that was never done. And he only ever notified the IPO just before that 2004 hearing. So it was all illegal. The assignments were illegal, and I kicked up such a fuss about it.
But they were fictitious anyway.
But they were fictitious. They'd been done to hide this, that and the other, and make it look like that he was still the owner many years later. And luckily for me, after that hearing, which as I say I lost anyway, the IPO then told me, well, we're going to look at these things separately. They didn't say to me how, but they did say they were going to look at them in depth. And eventually, they then turned round and said that a hearing had been heard on this subject of the assignments by another of their hearing officers called Landau. Now, this happened in 2005 when they came to me and said, oh, we've had a hearing, it's been heard by Mr. Landau, and they sent me a copy of his decision.
Yeah.
And I was over the moon. Now, I wasn't allowed to attend that hearing, which I found staggering. And like I say, they didn't even tell me when or where it was being held. They just told me after the event, which was staggering.
But this Landau hearing in 2005, this isn't a hearing to oppose anybody's application.
No, it was just a separate hearing.
This is a separate hearing to investigate all the irregularities in Busbridge's documents.
That's right.
That he'd used in his application.
Yes.
And so at that hearing, at the Landau hearing, you weren't allowed to attend that.
No.
I presume Busbridge wasn't.
He was, yeah.
He was.
Yeah.
So that's interesting, isn't it? That
well,
it should be.
It's absolutely outrageous. Here they are, they have a hearing about my bloody trademark, and I'm not allowed to attend. They didn't even tell me, like I say, that I knew they were going to hold a hearing, but they didn't tell me when or where. And then I find out that Busbridge was at it. Now, I forgot all about that because when I got the decision document, because in actual fact, it was for me.
Yeah.
I won. And I've got it in writing from the IPO that I had won.
I presume he was there because it was his paperwork that they were pulling apart.
Yeah.
So he was trying to defend himself to say that his paperwork was valid.
Yeah, it was bona fide, as they say.
Bona fide, and he's lost that, which therefore means his original application is now invalidated because he made that application using dodgy paperwork.
Exactly.
And so now we're back to the status quo.
I'm back to square one.
Yeah.
Or at least I thought I was. I thought, well, I'm over the moon. I thought, well, this is it. It's, even though it's so many years down the line from 1992, at least I'd won, because this hearing officer said no way can Busbridge legally own this trademark, and he gave the reasons for it, which we don't need to go into, but I won. And then, but it didn't last long, because, as I said before, when you've got these legal hearings, any case in a court can be appealed.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, okay, he's going to appeal it, which he did. He put an application in straight away to appeal it. And I thought, well, okay, but what's he going to achieve? What can he do? All his evidence has been blashed, as it were, and shown to be incorrect. And the hearing officer said that, and I've won. So where's he going to get with his appeal? Nevertheless, he put in this appeal. And I was beginning to think, well, there's no end to all this. Now, the point is from now on is where the real criminal acts really kicked off. We've only heard the lead up to what is now going to happen. So I've said this, so we've gone through all this so that anybody looking at this video can understand how we get to this point. He appeals, and what should have happened would be that when you appeal a hearing or a judgment that you feel is incorrect, you can't just say, I didn't like that decision.
You have to have grounds for appeal.
Yeah, you've got to have grounds for appeal. So, as I say, now you've heard the lead up to the point where we get into the worst events and actions in this thoroughly sordid story, where we can see just how corrupt the IPO and what lengths they were prepared to go to get the result they actually wanted. Now, I will be explaining in more detail the following events. What we have to understand, as I say, is that theoretically, all these tribunals in the IPO, before the IPO, they're called tribunals. They're heard by hearing officers who are not judges, but they're very similar to judges, and the tribunals are equivalent to a court case. They have to obey the same rules. But the IPO hearing officers, say, are not judges. They're supposed to be, like a judge, squeakily independent. But by now, I knew this was not always going to be the case, because Reynolds obviously wasn't independent by any means. Landau seemed that he was, because he quite rightly, in everything he said in his decision, seemed really bona fide to me. So I thought that Reynolds was obviously working to an IPO agenda, and you only had to look at his decision document and the transcript, for it was all as crooked as can be. And again, why was that? And as I say, anybody can appeal a decision, but you've got to know that the grounds for getting an appeal have to be legally sound. In other words, as I've said, you can't just say, I didn't like that decision, it hasn't gone for me, and so I want an appeal. You must give sound legal grounds which show that the decision was wrong in law, or the officer behaved illegally, and so on. This is so in order to even be granted an appeal. And if you read his grounds as put forward by Busbridge, and it contained only 5 or 6 sentences, he had absolutely no legal grounds to be given an appeal. He made no legal submissions in those 6 sentences, and they were only short sentences. They had nothing to do with legal points. And so he had absolutely no legal grounds to be given an appeal, and yet he was given one. Now, why was that? You have to ask. You know, and I was thinking that. So here again we can see just how corrupt the IPO are. For what now went on was an absolute exercise in rampant government department corruption, and no other words for it. You have to ask, why did the IPO wish to hold an alleged but bogus appeal hearing when there was no legal grounds to grant one? And I will go on and explain why. It took the IPO some time before they even told me that an appeal was going to be held. And then I was told again I could not appeal, I could not attend.
Mm-hmm.
These are all ringing alarm bells, by the way. Remember, there was only a hearing at all because I had forced the IPO to look at all the illegal goings-on over Busbridge's evidence in 2004, which the IPO had failed to realise were illegal and lies and irrelevant and against their own rules, and yet they'd allowed it all into evidence. Now, what does that say about the IPO and how good they are and how they're prepared to act illegally? And this is something that I complain to them over and over again. And despite my continual complaints about it, allowing into evidence irrelevant ramblings that had no bearing on the case you were hearing, or were not even legal, and they just ignored you. You couldn't get anywhere with them. It was absolutely appalling. They even refused to tell me where this appeal hearing was going to be heard, let alone the date. And they did say that I couldn't attend again. But I later found out that I could have attended that hearing as a member of the public.
So this isn't just some back room somewhere. It is a proper courtroom where the public can turn up and attend.
Yes. In London, the IPO have a big office. They used to be based in London. All their offices were there, and then they moved some of their offices to South Wales. But they kept on the London place. And when you go there, it's on the north bank of the Thames, not that far from London Bridge. And you go in, and it's a pucker court.
Yeah.
There's a place for the judge, as it were, and place for the public, and place for the people who are attending it to sit. Now, I later on, as I say, found that I could have attended as a member of the public, but they didn't tell me that. And obviously, they didn't want me there at all. In retrospect, it's clear that they wished to carry out a thoroughly illegal meeting.
Mm-hmm.
Not an appeal hearing, because like I say, they had no grounds for an appeal hearing, which if I were not there, they could do the hell they liked, which is exactly what they did. Now, what was the reason for this bogus alleged appeal hearing? The IPO knew that Busbridge had no grounds to be given openly and honestly an appeal, as that simply did not fit into their obvious agenda, which I now know what it was. They wanted to strip me of my trademark. Why would they wish to do that, you may well ask? Well, you can see why in due course, as I will show you why. But when you read all the documents that I have, it is there, if you read the remarks that they have made in various hearings, like the 2004 hearing, which show you that there's an agenda going on and they have it against me. They have something against me. They're trying to achieve something against me. And especially this can be heard when the hearing officer, Salthouse, in the last hearing in 2010, which was when they stripped me finally of my trademark, had a legal bona fide reasons to have an appeal, they were to have said Landau decision was totally wrong in law. They would hate to have to do that. So they would have had to have granted his appeal, and Busbridge would be back at square one, being allowed to also have the registration of the mark Viper. That would mean two people had, and they knew that I would have grounds to try and stop that, because you obviously can't have two trademarks for this. Better they did it this way by appearing to grant the right to appeal, knowing I could not stop it in any way. Instead, having a corrupt, bogus and alleged I would not be present, they could do whatever they liked at that meeting. They had hoped that they could blind me with science, as they say, after the alleged but bogus appeal hearing. In other words, for well over a year, they stuffed me and my MP, which I got involved, because I was still waiting for the decision to come out, over telling us what should have been decided after that bogus appeal hearing that really never was, knowing all the time there would be no decision to disclose. You can't make it up. Any attempt from me to find out what the decision was after I knew the hearing had been held, from what I thought had been a bona fide appeal hearing, was subject. This meeting had been held in London and was officiated by a Treasury Solicitor's barrister, a Mr. Hobbs QC, who is a high-up, well-known specialist barrister in IP matters. Now, Busbridge had opted to have this alleged appeal hearing heard not by an IPO hearing officer, but by a so-called independent person. And this is something that you can do if you suspect that the IPO is not being independent in its dealings with whatever you're going through. However, in the Busbridge's case, the IPO had always bent over backwards for him. So why did he choose this method of appeal if prior to that the IPO were doing whatever he wanted, by the looks of it? So I very much suspect that the IPO put him up to it, because it would mean the hearing would have the respectability it needed, because it was being run by a respected QC barrister, no less. This to allay any suspicions that shonky goings-on were about to be the order of the day. And I was only told, days before the hearing took place, of its date.
And do you know what that date was then?
Well, it was sometime in 2005, I think it was May. But I was not told where it would be held.
No.
So, out of the blue, they just say, oh, the hearing's on such and such a date, you can't attend. So after that date, you're naturally waiting for the decision. And obviously I was anxious to hear its decision, for it would greatly affect the future of my ownership of the trademark. And you may think it's strange that having sold the business and therefore I could not be using it, why did I want to still have ownership? Well, I've already explained that. And the trademark, as it happens, was, when I sold the business, licensed, which you can do, to the new owners. It was still in circulation, it was still being used by the new owners of my defunct business. And I actually owned it, even though it was licensed out. I was still the legal owner. So it was still worth money. And I knew that Chrysler still could have desires to own it at some stage, if I could get rid of this Busbridge crook, and at last got full ownership of him, with him out of the way, I could at least sell it to them for a reasonable sum, maybe. And I must say, it would be a sum that would not cover the cost of all my costs to date and all the money that I'd lost in lost business, but it would be something. So, years were lost when I could not be making full profits of my business, as I say. Had I not had to put up with years of illegal copies of my car by Busbridge, and also in those years I could have built my business back up to its former heights. That would have meant I could have carried on with the business right up to retirement at, say, 70.
And do you think that you would have done that?
Yes, because in my retirement, once I got my health back again, I have actually restored quite a few classic sports cars.
Yeah.
And so my health is such now that even with the heart attack, and I may not have had the heart attack if all this had not happened, but I could have easily gone up to 70, because
Yeah.
I'm a bloke who likes to work. I don't like hanging around doing nothing.
But if you had, it's rather than restoring some sports cars, classic cars,
Yeah.
do you think that you'd have carried on then with your Cobras?
Well, yes, I would, because the companies that were around in opposition to me all through the 80s and 90s
Yeah.
are still around. There is still a good market for Cobras and other kit cars, and quite frankly, today there's a good market for Lamborghini replicas. In the days that I made your car, it got to a stage where you could buy a second-hand real Lambo for not much more than it cost to build a replica.
Yeah.
So I could feasibly, if my health had been okay and I hadn't had to put up with Busbridge and what he did, if I'd have been able to carry on that business after the recession of '92, I could easily have built it up to where it was in the 80s.
Yeah.
And had that been so, I'd have been making profits, and I would have been able to work right up to 70 instead of retiring at 61. So all that was trashed by the events, as it were. Had I been able to do that and ended up with a nice running business with making good profits, and I wanted to sell it, I would have obviously got a good price for it, because the price of any business you sell is dependent on its turnover and how much profit it's making. So all that was gone and trashed. The IPO, on my continued inquiries throughout 2005 and well into 2006 as to where was this decision, they always used the excuse that as the alleged hearing had been held under the auspices of an independent person, it was out of the IPO's hands and in his. By doing this, they were carrying out a massive fraud upon myself and my MP, as you might say, because, as I say, he was involved. And you will see this. After I got my then MP, who was a useless ex-public schoolboy, and even was an ex-lawyer called Chope, who was still an MP, to also push them, they even lied to him by saying they had no way they could give us any answer. And this went on for over a year. And all the time that was happening, I'm thinking, what's going on here? This is decidedly suspicious. Normally, after a hearing has taken place, and you're waiting for the decision, 3 months maximum. And here we were, well over a year. And I knew they were lying to me. However, as there had in fact been no appeal hearing, there was no decision. So they were lying. I hope you can see that all the time they were saying, well, we can't give you the result of the decision.
Yeah.
They knew that there was going to be no decision because Busbridge was advised by the barrister to drop it. So they knew all the time I was pushing them, there ain't going to be any decision hearing. So it was a massive act of corruption and lies. And
so there was no decision,
no
appeal hearing,
exactly.
and instead they'd had some other sort of a meeting.
Well, they'd had what it amounted to. If you read the transcript, they had a meeting, not an appeal hearing. Now, I've been through an appeal hearing. I know exactly what way they should go and what happens in them. Normally, in a pucker appeal hearing, you put your reasons for wanting an appeal, right? They're all lawful, legal reasons. The first thing that the person hearing the appeal would want to do is go over your reasons, asking you any questions that he's thought up of to elaborate on those reasons. It would be quite a short hearing, by the way, because all he's got to do is address the grounds that you've given and make a decision as to whether they are bona fide and either grant the appeal or not grant it. And what, if you read the transcript, no reference was made to any of the grounds that he'd given. It just was, the first half of the meeting was just going over case law. And by the way, the IPO, the head of the legal department, was present at this hearing. And that in itself is very unusual, because appeal hearings are just held usually by the one person. Why was he there? And so all the time they were saying, well, we don't know what went on, was a lie, because their head of the law section, Mr. James, was there. They knew full well that it had not been held as an appeal hearing and just a meeting where they could give advice to Busbridge, and and one of the pieces of advice they gave him was to drop the appeal. I'll have a few words to say about that in a minute. So the IPO just kept on lying that they knew nothing. Now eventually, well into 2006, some 14 or 15 months on, I was told that the alleged appeal hearing actually had been dropped by Busbridge. But I was not told when this had happened. I was immediately suspicious again. For usually, if you're going to drop an appeal, you drop it before it's heard, because you've decided, well, I'm not going to win this and it's a waste of time. You don't drop it after it had allegedly been heard. I mean, it's a nonsense. Anybody, even who's not a lawyer, would know that that's a nonsense. You're not going to go through an appeal hearing and then at the very end of it you say to the guy who's hearing it, oh, by the way, forget all about what we've just gone through, I'm dropping it. I mean, it's just a nonsense. They never told me exactly when he decided it, but if you read the transcript, you'll come to a point where this Hobbs fella is actually advising him to drop it.
So they've met for the appeal. They've started the appeal.
Yeah. Well, it wasn't an appeal, it was a meeting.
Partway through they decided it was a meeting.
No. I've termed it a meeting.
Yeah.
They've never ever accepted that what I've said, that it wasn't an appeal hearing. They keep going on that it was an appeal hearing.
So that they maintain it was an appeal hearing.
Yeah.
But during that appeal hearing, Hobbs advised Busbridge to drop his appeal.
Yeah.
Within
and gave an advice.
Within that same meeting or
Yes,
appeal,
yeah,
whatever. So, if during the appeal hearing, Busbridge drops his appeal, but they continue the meeting.
Well, I don't know exactly when. You can see in the appeal hearing where Hobbs advises him to drop it. It's right at the end.
Yeah.
It's toward the end. But during this meeting, and Hobbs is giving him advice as to what to do, and referring to me, by the way, and I had nothing to do with it, so why were they referring to me? He is giving advice time and time again to Busbridge, explaining to him what position he's in, which is if he doesn't do this and he doesn't do that and he doesn't do this and that and that and that, he's going to lose. And he's going to lose and go back to square one, and that will be it. So if you read the transcript carefully, and it's on my blog, by the way, so people can have a look at it and download. And I've annotated on the edges of the pages exactly what they're doing and what his advice is. And so the whole bogus appeal hearing was not, as I say, an appeal hearing. It was a meeting where they got together to give, it's as obvious as the day is long, they wanted to give him advice as to what to do to get out of the hole that he was in. And Hobbs actually describes it as such. You're in a hole, and you've got to do this to get out of the hole. And one of the other things that they advised him to do is to get hold of his brother, Martin. Now, Martin and Robert had started off their business as partners, and in 1992, about the same time as Robert Busbridge was trying to get £500,000 off Chrysler, they'd had a big bust-up. And by the way, when he went to Chrysler, he never told his brother what he was doing. His brother never found out until later, but they'd broken up the partnership. And so had Busbridge, Robert Busbridge, had any legal rights to have the trademark, which I don't see how he could, but had he had any legal rights, he was sharing them with his brother. And when they split up, he could not take over the full ownership of the trademark. So this is why Hobbs was telling him, go and find your brother and get him to sign a document releasing his rights, his half of the rights to you. Now, that is strictly illegal. No judge or hearing officer or independent person is allowed to give advice during a hearing. And they're doing it blatantly.
And that's in the transcript?
That's all in the transcript. I think they didn't think I would be able to get a transcript. And I'll explain what I had to do in order to get it. Now, I knew that they knew that I was very suspicious about what was going on.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd actually said to them, in letters I'd sent them, that I was very suspicious of all this. I knew that if I went to them and said, oh, by the way, in relation to this hearing that you say took place, I want the transcript for it. They knew that if I got hold of the transcript, the game would be up. I would see everything that had gone on. So I thought to myself, well, I can't do that, because they'll make excuses. They'll either say there was no transcript, because the hearing would have been recorded, you see, and they make the transcripts off a recording. An outside company does that. And so they were making an excuse for me to not get it. So I thought, I'll play it this way. I'll ring up as a student of law and saying I'm looking into various trademark decisions and cases, and can you let me have a transcript of this particular hearing?
Yeah.
And I didn't ring the law department that this James belonged to and who was dealing with this case. I rang just a general part of an inquiries office, and the girl said, oh yeah, no problem, and I got it.
Yeah.
And so that was when I read it, and I knew all my doubts and fears were realised. And so after I'd read it, I was horrified, for it confirmed all my suspicions, and I now had over the honesty of the IPO and what they were willing to indulge in, even to the point of breaking the law. For it was immediately obvious that this had never been a bona fide appeal hearing. They didn't discuss anything to do with his application and his reasons and grounds for asking for an appeal. It was all advice, advice, advice. And I called it, so I therefore called it a meeting, at which this Mr. Hobbs QC had indulged in a massive course of advice giving to our ace crook Busbridge. A solid 2-hour session of advice, given first of all, dressing it up as looking at case law and discussing that. And who did Hobbs discuss the case law with? He discussed it with, I mean, he couldn't discuss it on his own.
No.
And if it had been a bona fide appeal hearing, he would have been on his own. So it's obvious they had this Mr. James there, so he and James could discuss this case law between each other. Which, as I say, is just totally out of order. So we reached a decision where I could see that this what had gone on, and that wasn't an appeal. Now, this appeal was against an IPO decision. As I say, it was Landau's decision, and was supposed to be heard by an independent person, because the appellant, Busbridge, wanted an independent hearing. Independent from the IPO. So if you suspect that the IPO is not treating you properly, over a case that they're dealing with, and there's going to be an appeal because you've made one, you can then, as I said before, you can decide to ask that hearing, that appeal hearing, is heard by an independent person, and they take that supposed independent person from the Treasury solicitors. I don't know why they go to them, but they cough up this this alleged independent person for you, who in this case was one of their lawyers called Hobbs, who was an expert on IP law. So what I'm saying is that this person should be independent from the IPO, you would think. But if you research Mr. Hobbs, as I have, all his work is done for the IPO. All the big hearings that they hear, where multinational companies are involved, he's there.
Yeah.
He's heard so many cases over the last years, and that's all he does. So if he's working through the IPO over, like, say, 20 years, and he'll obviously know everybody in the IPO, including Mr. James, because he'd be the one he'd come into contact all the time. So how can he be called independent? And yet he's supposed to be hearing this case, which is brought about by an IPO decision, and be independent on behalf of Busbridge. And Mr. James is there. So the whole thing stank to high heaven. None of them were divorced from the IPO, and this couldn't have been an independent hearing. So I hope you get what I'm getting at here. It was a sick joke and an affront to the justice system. So from the word go, Hobbs and James indulged in probably an hour or more of legal discussions over case law, and that is absolutely not the way any bona fide appeal hearing would go. Straight away, the appointed person would be going into all the stated legal reasons the appellant had given for asking for the appeal. The independent person reading what had been claimed and asking for clarifications from the appellant if needed. This is how a bona fide appeal hearing would go. And that would be all that would be said and done. Not a 2-hour hearing where loads of advice is given. The judge would then go away and mull over all that, and then he would come to a decision fairly quickly, within 3 months, whether the stated reasons had legal merit. And that is when the appointed person may well refer in his decision to case history. You wouldn't be dealing with case history at the hearing, is what I'm getting at.
No.
He would only look at and put in case history to back up his decision, whatever that would be, in his decision document. So it can be easily seen that firstly the IPO wished to present to Busbridge a scene where they could dress up this meeting that they knew he wouldn't have a clue as to how a genuine appeal hearing should appear to be. And this giving somebody, and this by having someone there which the appointed person could have conversations with, and therefore show to Busbridge certain legal facts that if he cottoned onto them, he could use as a later date if he had to come back to the IPO with arguments. Also, with James being present, he could then be conversant with everything that was going on, and he could steer things to where the IPO wanted them to be. It's obvious to me, as I say, that both these guys knew each other because of the way they were talking to each other, and that's totally illegal. So you have to ask yourself, why did the IPO do all this? Well, I think, you ask yourself, well, wouldn't they think that they could be found out? And if they were found out, that something could be done against them. But I think they're so arrogant that their way of thinking is, well, we can carry out this bogus meeting, dressed up as an appeal hearing, giving loads of advice to Busbridge, because he will then go and do what we want, and you will see what we want very soon, because they are the law. And I've found this to be the case in all my efforts to get justice. other departments in the justice system just treat this guy Hobbs as a god, as it were. He's the law. If he wants to do this way, we can't do anything about it. So they just were so arrogant that they thought, well, we can get away with all this. We can give Busbridge all the advice we think he needs to do what we want him to do. And Mr. Cook won't be able to do a damn thing about it because we are the law. So after giving Busbridge legal tips, they got down to giving him advice on how to circumvent Landau's decision that had gone against him. And he was told what steps he had to take, and was clearly told, and this again you can see in the transcript, that not only that, but the IPO would help him if necessary. And that is illegal. And they subsequently did it, the illegal bastards. They helped him to be able to contact his brother, Martin, who was now living in Spain. And if you read the transcript, you will see all this. So I'm not going to go into other than what I've already said about this transcript, because it's all in there. People can download it and see exactly what's gone on. The exceptionally long period that I was made to wait for the bogus, non-existent appeal hearing decision was because no appeal was ever heard, as I've said, so no decision. It was alleged that after he had dropped the appeal, and funnily enough, as I said, he did that after and not before the bogus hearing, he was advised by Hobbs to do so. He was also advised, as I've said, to find his brother Martin and get him to agree to certain acts, one of them handing over his half of all the assets of the previous business to his brother, Robert. But because Busbridge is somewhat thick, he took time to carry out all the advice that was given him. And in any case, in no way would he want to contact his brother, as he was advised to do, as he knew that he wouldn't get anywhere with his brother. His brother would never do what he asked him to do because of the big falling out they had. His brother was residing, as I say, in Spain, and Busbridge knew exactly where he was living because he'd visited him. Yet he lied to the IPO and gave them a false address. And then the IPO once more bent over backwards to help him and wrote to Martin on his behalf. I find that fact absolutely astonishing, that the IPO actually was helping a person in Busbridge's position, and it is highly illegal to do so. To ask him to say he had no interest in the mark.
The IPO is writing to Martin Busbridge,
yeah,
to ask him to confirm he's got no interest in
exactly.
the Viper trademark.
Exactly. I've got a copy of the letter. Yeah. But of course, because Robert had given them a fictitious address, because he didn't want his brother involved anyway, really, he had to go through the motions of doing what they said he should do. But they then decided, well, we'll write to the address. And of course, because it was a fictitious address, they got no answer from Martin. Again, I've just said this is highly illegal and clearly helping an individual that the IPO constantly tell you they cannot give legal advice. Go and see a lawyer is what they say. You simply can't make it up. It's all illegal. So this explains why I and my MP were lied to again and again when we kept asking, where is this alleged decision? They and Busbridge were so busy trying to carry out their corrupt and illegal actions, and it was taking them time because they couldn't get in contact with Martin. Now, as soon as I realised all this, I made an official complaint to the CEO of the IPO, which is what you have to do if you want to make what they call a formal complaint. But as usual, after laying out to him all the facts with documentary evidence, I got no more than a whole packet of lying excuses back from him. So I got nowhere. It didn't surprise me. I then could only complain officially to every Ministry of Justice complaints avenue. Now they have a number of different ways that you can make formal complaints about what has gone on that you think is illegal, especially where a barrister is concerned, who's working for the IPO, or rather the Treasury solicitors. At each stage I was lied to and stonewalled and told they could not intervene in the decision of a judge. Now if you read the transcript and you read any of the documents to do with that hearing, this guy, Hobbs, is never referred to as a judge. He's always referred to as Mr. So they're lying when they say we can't query the decision of a judge, because he wasn't a judge. And as I say, no judge was actually hearing this alleged hearing, and that can be seen in the official transcript as Hobbs was not referred to as a judge but plain Mr. So they even ignored my telling them that no decision was ever made, because they'd said we can't query a decision made by a judge. No matter what I said, I was ignored, or lies were made to cover it all up. I subsequently went on to complain to Cameron. I was so incensed. Kenneth Clark, who was then the Justice Minister, Grayling, who was then the Attorney General. So no matter who I approached, it was always the same. Either ignored completely, no reply, or lied to, and this is what we, the British citizens, have to put up with when we try to get justice against corruption perpetrated by the state and against us. Let's face it, our politicians and all their civil servants have centuries of expertise at doing this kind of thing and covering their backsides by incessant lying. British civil servants simply will never admit to failings because they are scared witless that you will take them to court, and when it is shown they are at fault, it will affect their standing in their jobs and maybe their pensions. Have you ever heard of any manager, say, losing his job in the civil service? Remember that excellent and very true comedy, Yes Minister? I used to love that programme. All they portrayed is absolutely true, and in fact the bastards in the civil servants and in our government are even worse than that comedy show portrayed, because they rely on feeble people giving up at the first lies and obfuscations when they try to complain about anything, and they're right. For most members of the public do just that. They give up, they cave in. And it's only strong-willed people like myself who have experience in business and in the world who will not give in, because we want justice and will carry on until we get it. Now you'll be thinking, well, what happened after that illegal corrupt hearing and Busbridge carrying out all the advice he was given? Well, there were two more thoroughly corrupt hearings held in 2008 and 2009, which I won't go into, but except to say they were held by, again, thoroughly bent IPO hearing officers who trashed all my evidence that I put in and my reasoning, and they made sure that the directions of the IPO were carried out on their behalf, meaning I lost both of them, and Busbridge was given full registration of my trademark. Now at a third hearing in 2010, this was when Busbridge then applied to have my registration, which I still had at that stage, made invalid, because obviously he didn't want two people to have registration of the same trademark, even though he knew I wasn't trading any longer. Now I had to borrow money. I decided, well, this is my last chance to get justice. Even if I don't get any money, I want justice, because this is all terrible. It's an affront to my rights to hold that trademark. So I borrowed money to pay for legal representation this time. Now all the other hearings I represented myself. And I thought, I'm going to borrow money because this is my last chance to defend my registration and try for justice, and thus I needed a lawyer to act for me this time, and not me representing myself. and that cost quite a lot of money, I might add. As he turned out, yet again, to be a complete waste of time and money. Firstly, even though by now Martin Busbridge had come out the woodwork and actually contacted me from Spain. Well, no, actually, he'd come back from Spain. As the economy in Spain had dropped, he came to London again. And he got in touch with me because he'd seen I was fighting his brother in order to join me to debunk all the pathological lying of his corrupt brother, Robert.
So sorry, is Martin at the 2010 hearing?
Yes, yes,
right.
We're going to lead up to that. So he got in touch with me before the 2010 hearing because he heard that it was going to happen, and he says, I want to help you because I know exactly what went on throughout the whole history and all the lies I see that my brother has told in various hearings. I was quite staggered actually, but I always got on well with Mark. Mark was a totally different character to his brother. Of course I had a lot of contact with both of them. Now my lawyer that I took on was a young, inexperienced man. Now I didn't know that he was as inexperienced as it turned out he was. And he approached my defence in what I now realise was absolutely the wrong way. And he never stood up to the hearing officer, this Salthouse bloke, who was an absolute bully, who officiated in the 2010 hearing in London. Not that that would have stopped the corrupt decision that we eventually got being made the way it was. I could see that. So once more the IPO made good their ambition to destroy me and take my mark off me that they had given me in 1998 and then give it to Busbridge. What I want to point out to you is this, is what that hearing officer said at that 2010 hearing in London. He told us right at the start that the IPO was sick of this case and its long history. They had obviously, in their eyes, thought it had blighted their cosy, idle civil service world. You know, where all these civil servants are sitting around doing nothing, giving them thousands of hours of work and no doubt overstretched the poor bastards because they had to keep working out all their corrupt and illegal ways in order to thwart me all over that period of time. Now he was a big set man with a menacing air and a loud, forceful, no-nonsense voice. And it was obvious to me that he was hand-picked for this job of getting rid of me. He reiterated that the IPO were now wanting to get it finished once and for all, which I found odd. Yet in the transcript, these statements do not appear. Now why is that? Well, it's the IPO making sure it doesn't for obvious reasons. They don't want it coming out. But that's what he said. Anyway, he went on like this. But this is what he eventually said that gained the and so it went on like this. But this is what he eventually said that gave the game away. And he said the consequences of this decision is that Mark 2070139 is deemed to have never been registered. The term 2070139 is the reference number of my opposition to Chrysler trying to register the Viper name. So what the IPO are saying through this guy is that when I opposed Chrysler in 1998 to stop them registering the name I had used since 1986, this opposition was carried out by my legal people who all knew IP law, and I had won against the bite and knowledge of Chrysler's top IP lawyers. All that counted for nothing. Their decision then that I had legally had claim to it, hence them allowing me the registration, was all a nonsense. And so much so that now they are saying it was as if it had never been registered to me at all. How can you believe that? To me it says it all. My lawyer told Salthouse in this 2010 hearing that I had obtained the trademark based on my use back to 1986 and on honest use, which is the term they use. And the registry had thus given me registration. In other words, he's telling the Salthouse guy, well, what you just said is a nonsense. Of course, lawyers don't do that in hearings, as they don't like upsetting the judge or whoever. So he was too soft. He should have made a big fuss about it, and he didn't. But Salthouse then went on to make another statement which shows the IPO had decided at some time that I shouldn't have been given registration at all in the first place. For he then said to my lawyer, and this is the crux of the matter that I hope everybody can see, certainly it's in the transcript of that hearing, I'm afraid that in the past certain actions of the registry, and that is the term they use for the IPO or the Intellectual Property Office, have been proved to be wrong. I would not hold too much stock by the fact that we made the decision, that is the decision to give me the registration, and therefore it is cast in stone. In other words, what he's saying is that we made a mistake. And when we make decisions, those decisions cannot be said to be cast in stone forever. I regret that we have been overturned too many times to make that the case. Now, for people with a poor grasp of the English language and not familiar with the way legal people talk in riddles, which is really what he's doing, this thoroughly corrupt man working for the corrupt IPO is saying here that when the IPO gave me registration in 1998, they made a mistake. But has never said what that mistake was. So what was that mistake? And I want to know. And now they are moving heaven and earth to correct that mistake. Only no mistake in law was made at all, because in 1986, when I started using this mark, it had belonged to me and only me. And I suggest you, anybody watching this that will query that, would read up on common law to do with trademarks. However, at this point, one has to ask why the APO said all this in the 2010 hearing. That was supposed to hear the stated grounds of Busbridge's submissions as to why my being given registration were invalid. They never discussed his reasons in this hearing. Yet here we had the IPO doing his job for him and giving at least one reason that he had never even thought of. And that was that they had made a mistake in giving me registration back in 1998. Now, if this was a bona fide hearing, an application by Busbridge to take my registration off me, surely he should have used this as one of the legal reasons why it was a mistake to give it me, and he never did. So what I'm saying is that they, the IPO, are bringing this out that they made a mistake, which they, by law, shouldn't have done, because they're not supposed to fight the case on the behalf of Busbridge, which is, by saying that, they actually are. And this is the reason why they then said, well, we made a mistake, and so we're now rectifying that mistake, and we're going to take it off you as if you never had been given it in the first place. Now, how corrupt is that? Now, I've only mentioned the 2010 hearing to show one reason for all the IPO's corrupt actions since 1998. It's now clear why everything that happened from the time of my winning against Chrysler had happened, if you read through it all. They had decided that somewhere along the line, we've made a mistake by giving Mr. Cook this registration. Maybe they blamed the hearing officer who heard that case, and thinking, oh, he did a crap job, and he went and gave this Mr. Cook the registration, then he should never have done that, and we've got to rectify it. And this is what they did throughout all the history. And it explains everything. So this latest debacle, after this latest debacle, my lawyer said he could not believe how the IPO had behaved throughout the whole history towards me and in this latest hearing, ignoring my evidence and believing all the lies of Busbridge, including what they'd said about this mistake. He told me the only way I could get justice was to take everything away from the IPO and take it to the independent High Court. Now, I've already said to do that. You're talking big bucks. Now, I agreed with him. Needless to say, he and the company he worked for, in keeping with most money-grasping UK law firms, they say, oh well, you know, you've got a case to go and appeal, and we've got to do it through the High Court. But they wouldn't do it on pro bono, which means free advice, and hoping to get their money back through making the IPO pay when you win, or doing it on a no-win, no-fee basis. With the same thing. And at the end, they take a gamble, in other words, and in the end, when they win, they get compensation and they get their fee that way. But they wouldn't do it, which really hacked me off no end. Here they are. They should have won that case. They didn't stand up to the hearing officer, Salthouse, and now they're telling me that, well, they can't believe that happened, but I have got a good case to appeal, but we're not going to do it for you unless you pay us. So obviously, as far as I was concerned, that was it. I couldn't see any way forward other than trying to carry on complaining about it and trying to show all that had happened was illegal and corrupt, and get justice. They ruined my life and they ruined my business and everything else, put the stress on me which resulted in a heart attack and forced me into early retirement. Not only that, but all the proceedings from 92 onwards had cost me tens of thousands of pounds in costs, legal costs. And you have to ask, is this the way an honest government department should behave? But unfortunately, it's par for the course, and untold thousands have suffered even worse than I have at the hands of many different government departments. You have to ask, why did they give it to a person who had been proved to have lied through his back teeth from 1992 to 2010? Every one of the 7 hearings and 1 county court hearing where he tried to have me imprisoned were riddled with perjury and forgery. Yet the IPO gave him registration, knowing all that, after taking it off me to slate their desire, according to them, to correct a mistake that they'd made. And they did this despite him never proving that he legally had a right to it. And it's one thing saying you have a right to it, but you have to prove you have, and he never ever did that in any of these hearings. And all the lies of the IPO will never prove he did have a right to it. All their fancy case law is nothing but smoke and mirrors and obfuscations. Now, since the corrupt hearing in 2010, I've pursued every avenue I can think of trying to get justice, especially over that bogus hearing in 1998, which turned the tide, which was then going my way. My experience doing that have shown me that once again how useless our justice and police systems are. And on top of that, if they were not bad enough, I have proved to myself how corrupt they are. And it starts at the top with our prime ministers and works its way down through various ministers who haven't a clue what their departments are up to or how they should work efficiently. My complaint recently to the then Justice Minister about all this, a Miss Liz Trust, who is now no longer in the job, was intercepted by one of her staff and passed back to the very people that I'd complained to previously in the justice system, and guess what? They used the exact same excuses that the decision of a judge could not be questioned when no judge actually officiated and no decision had ever come out, as I've explained. So what chance have people got of finding themselves in a position like I am in, ever getting justice? For no one really cares, and all are prepared to lie to kingdom come. Newspapers and TV news are exactly the same, as they too are never interested in cases like this. They only want to peddle nonsense for their readers, who most of them don't have any brains. Serious stuff today is too difficult for them, and no one cares anyway. So I've got nowhere at all, no matter which way I go to try and get somebody to take this on and get justice for me. You can't get legal aid, so no lawyers will touch it, and even those who do public law, which any prosecution of Hobbes and James would come under, because they were in official office, will take it on, unless I paid umpteen thousands of pounds to them. I cannot even get an opinion on free legal aid advice sessions you used to be able to get, because as soon as you mention taking on people in public office, they know nothing about, they say they know nothing about that subject, so they cannot help you, and it's proving impossible to get any justice. And legal aid these days is gaily given out to people who commit crimes, and especially to immigrants, even when here illegally. Yet people in my position are denied it, and are thus denied justice. Now, very quickly, here's a list of all the criminal acts that Busbridge committed in the whole of this Saunders case. He's a serial and pathological liar, making over 200 separate acts of perjury before 8 courts and hearings. He stole the designs of my Cobra, he stole the trademark, he tried to sell my mark to Chrysler for £500,000 when he never owned it. He attempted to have me put in prison. He lied in all his adverts for the copy of my car. He lied to various magazines about how he could claim my trademark. He lied to that the cars he said he'd made, which were in actual fact made by me, and were made from kits supplied by me. He went bankrupt and lied about that. He lied when he said he'd assigned the trademark, which he never had ownership of, in order to hide that from the insolvency people when he went bankrupt. He lied by saying he had acquired the trademark from my Swiss agent and forged a document supposed to have been signed by my Swiss agent giving him the trademark. And so it went on, just lies and lies, and yet they thought he was a good enough person to take my trademark off me and give it him. The IPO believed every word he ever said and every scrap of lying evidence he ever put in. They knew full well in the earlier days that he was trying to sell my mark to Chrysler, and yet all of this was ignored by the IPO, and they treated him as if he was a squeaky clean saint, worthy of giving him my legitimately owned trademark, even though they knew it had trashed my business and my health and life. And you have to ask, why did they do that? Well, this is the UK government standards these days. They quite happily side with crooks and liars, and are quite happy to do in law-abiding people like myself. So, that is the situation. I've now reached the end of my story, which I hope has shown you just how corrupt government departments can be, and how people like me are just doomed to never get justice. Unless you're rich, you can't get justice in this country these days. They've taken legal aid away from almost everything, and you end up in the situation I'm in.
Indeed.
What more can one say? It's terrible. And I hope that this video will be seen by maybe someone who could be as appalled as I am, and maybe offer me some help and assistance in getting justice.
But you'll still be pursuing your side of things through your blog?
Well, I started the blog in 2008 after that bogus hearing when I got the transcript. I thought, well, I'm going to expose them. The newspapers aren't going to expose them, the TV news is not going to do it. I'm going to try and expose them this way. However, I must say it hasn't helped.
But if anybody was interested in the details of the transcripts and all the rest of it, that's also available on the blog.
Yes, there is a transcript of that bogus hearing. And there's lots of documents on it that appertain to this case that can be downloaded. So by reading the blog, they'll see all the information that I've expounded here in this video on that blog, plus a lot of the documents. And if they wanted to, they can get in contact with me through the blog. So that's about it.
Okay, well, that's where it stands. And Ken, good luck.
Thank you.